Can you hear me? Hello? Can you turn it off? Hello? Can you hear me now? There's still some people that can't hear anything. Hello? I hope you can hear me also. I'll start if you have time for it. Just a short introductions about myself. I'm a front-end developer here at DFDS in the digital freight tribe. I've been doing web development for, I think, almost, it is for 25 years now. So I've been starting with WinCGI and moved on to all kinds of stuff. But I ended up in React, I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago. Been doing React since. Got bored of C#. It wasn't me anymore. Too much boilerplate. So I think I'll talk a bit about ChatGPT or OpenAI more specific. Have any of you used OpenAI for something? You're probably not going to learn that much then. Okay, sorry for that. But I'll try my best and I'll go through this a bit fast because I have a lot of slides. So maybe I'll skip something if it's running late. So let me move on. So this is what I'm thinking about talking about, but in case I don't have time, I'll skip some of it. Yeah, so I will start with what I actually did. We have something internally in the DFDS called the front-end community where we meet and talk about tech and stuff like that. And I tend to find a side project where I can learn something new. And I wanted to do something with OpenAI at least, and maybe some image generation. And so I came up with an idea for a small website where you can put your childhood memories of movies and doing the typical Hollywood remake of a movie. So I made a small site. It's using something called the MovieDB for looking up movies and OpenAI for generating a remake and also generating a prompt for, I don't know, yeah, generating a cover image for the movie. So I'll just show you the, oh, this is the wrong link. So just write the right one. I actually bought a domain for it because can't even. Okay, so you can pick any movie. I need to pick something that I haven't generated already. So maybe Steel. I don't know if I made a remake of that already. No, I haven't. So this is now asking ChatGPT to, I'm using version 4 to make a remake of this movie. So it's passing along and writing some new plots and finding new actors for the remake. But I will cover that in a moment. So when it's done doing the plot for the new movie, it will also again ask ChatGPT, can you find the title for the new movie? And it found a new title for it. And it will start generating a poster of the actor who's going to play the main character. I don't know who was picked. Someone from Westworld. I don't know that actor, but hopefully I'll get an image soon. It's not like it's the fastest thing working with AI. Sometimes there's some startup time, especially for image generation. Can take some time. Also, ChatGPT 4 is pretty slow, so that's why you're always doing streaming. That's some of the things that we'll cover in this talk. How you can do streaming to the client. Okay. It's slow. Okay, let's maybe not wait that long. I can find some of the cached one instead if this is too slow. No, I'm using Stable Diffusion for. You can OpenAI has some image generation, but there's a content filter on it. As soon as you write an actor name, not allowed because copyright. And just take a, just for instance, this is a cast version, so it's making a poster like this for the new remake. This is not working right now, so let me return to this. Let me go full screen again. So let me, when you do a project like this, you need to ask yourself, what is this going to cost me? Because it's not cheap to use OpenAI, especially if you start using ChatGPT 4 and some image generation. So I did some chatting with ChatGPT to calculate how much it will cost and if I actually should cache it when you get more than one response, maybe if it goes viral. And I think my ChatGPT has been a bit sarcastic, but it returned this to me. You need to cache it. I think I calculated it could be thousands of dollars if it went viral, just in case. So let me move along. So just a side note, I don't know if you have ever used the Next.js new app folder. It's super nice. I think you should look into it because it makes your code so much cleaner. I use the new Next.js for this. And the search is basically this, where you have like a function where you fetch the movies. You have some suspense that shows a skeleton while you're fetching the list of movies, and then you show the result. And your function for getting fetching the movies is just the fetch. So can't be more simple. No plugins, no nothing. You're just up and running. So that was a side note. I don't know if you start playing with OpenAI, you'll see something like this. This is a simple request. It's part of the OpenAI library. So you specify which model you want to use. This is the most common one, the fast one, and the cheap one. So I can recommend to use that one. And I don't think you get access to GPT-4. In the beginning, you need to spend some money before they open it up for you. I think they have promised to open it up for everyone that have been used, have spent of $1, and then they'll open it up. So I think it's gotten a lot easier. So basically, when you do using the AI, this is not the first question that you are asking. It's just to clarify it. This is actually the second question where you ask it for something, follow-up question. So there's different ways the message you can send to the ChatGPT. The first one is a system message where you set up, what are you? Is it a helpful assistant in this case, or should I respond as an angry pirate? You set up what you want. You can set up guidelines for which language it should respond in and which style. So it's up to you. But it's something where you tell ChatGPT how it should behave and respond. And the next one is the first question where you ask it for something, and then you get a response back. And because ChatGPT doesn't have any memory, it's your job to save the response you get from the API. So when you do a follow-up question, you need to have the entire history of your chat with it. So that's something you need to handle. Luckily, I would show you some libraries that handled it for you, so you don't have to do all it. But if you start to do it manually, you're calling the ChatGPT or the OpenAI, you need to remember to do this, or yeah, it will not work. There's also a max token you need to set. If you start getting in half an answer from the API, that's because you set the token to be too low. But if you increase it too much, it's also how they calculate how much it costs for you to use it. So you need to find the middle ground to set the token for your questions, so you don't ruin yourself. And I think temperature is set for how certain it should be when it's answering you. So if it has a low tempo, it could start hallucinating and writing nonsense. But yeah, that's something you'll find out. And the last one is streaming. I think that's mostly what I'm going to talk about, is how to get the nice streaming effect in your applications when you're using the API. So let's move on. So this is just an example of an early version I had for my app, where I have set up some question. I paste in the movie title, and then actually I didn't need to provide any of the plot. The only drawback is the cutoff is 2021 September. So if it's a newer movie, then it didn't know anything about it, but it will still come up with an answer. It just makes stuff up. Sometimes you get a pretty funny description of a movie because it's just making up nonsense. It's just trying to please you, or it's not always correctly what it's responding. Let me just pass this one. I don't know. There's a library from Vercel called Vercel AI SDK. I don't know if anyone you've tried using it, but it's a super nice library just to make a chat interface. So you can be up and running in an hour or two. You should be able to have an application. The styling part would be where you need to spend the most of your time. So basically, there's a drawback to this. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. It's only working on the edge, so you need to be hosted on Vercel. I don't know if Netlify supports it, but if you don't use Vercel for hosting, you need to be sure that your process is not being killed after a certain time, and that your host support stream the responses, because else you get nothing. And that was the problem I faced when I made my application, because either I didn't see that you could do it on the edge functionality, or it wasn't added to the documentation yet. So, but that's something you need to know, that there's some requirements to where you host it to make this work, the streamed response. So, but again, it's all packaged in the SDK, so you just basically get, this is the, sorry, didn't start to mention it, this is the API for the solution. So this is actually all you need to do a chatbot. So it gets a message from the client, and then it will ask the OpenAI to give you an answer back. So this is the API you need. And this is basically what you need in the front end to have a chat interface. So you have something called use chat, where you get some messages, so you get an input, the value, and there's a handler for the input, basic React, and there's a submit function you put on your form. And you get messages that it will complete, it will contain all the chat messages. The first question will be the first row. Yeah, I don't think it will not show the system messages for you using that. So, but basically it's super easy to get started. They also have a starter example where with nice layout you can use if you just want to have your own chat. But I'll come into that a bit more later, what you can use that for if you want to have a chat functionality. I wasn't interested in doing a chat. I would like the service where I ask the multiple question and it would stream back to the client in one response. So this hook use chat wasn't really cutting it for me. Just for the fun of it, I tried using it after I actually built the application, just rewriting it to use chat. But I ended up with something like this, where I have to have a function. When the first question has been answered, then I chain it to the next use chat and then forward. So it's going to be multiple requests to the backend. And yeah, it's like I say, the code base is going to look like this, and I wasn't happy, so I just scrapped it fairly quickly because it wouldn't make sense. But they have added some experimental features in the new version where you can do something a bit more like what I'm going to show soon. I did in the my actual implementation. So now they have added a function where you can have a data and where you can append something to the stream and get it back to the client. But again, it's something that will require some rewrite for me, and I didn't have time for it. So I don't have an example on this. Everything. Do you have a question? Okay. I'll take it there afterwards because we need a mic, or else people can't hear it. This is just for you to know that you can use the Vercel AI SDK for doing something similar to my app, but it wasn't present when I did this application. So let me just move along. So the most important thing when you are working with something like ChatGPT, you find out that responses are really slow, and you probably would get a terrible user experience if you waited for it to the API to return a complete message. So you need to do some streaming. So I found out two ways you could do a streamed response to the client. One is this server send event or chunk transfer encoding. So why do you do streaming? Because it's slow. AI is generally just slow, so you need some user feedback. So that's why you need early feedback, and it also frees up some server time, and it's cheaper, at least on the edge, if you're using something like this. I don't think you pay that much, at least not the solution I went for. You, the CPU time is not being as harsh. You're paying for the CPU you're using, not for the time. So because OpenAI is doing most of the work, it's pretty cheap because it's just idling and waiting for the response. So you're not hitting the CPU on your server. So it's also cheaper for you. And yeah, it's also optimizing some network resources. At least that's someone is claiming that. And it looks cool. So a server send event is basically there's some limitation to it. You can only do a get, so you can't do a post where you send a lot of information in your post body. So everything needs to be in the query string. And yeah, that's a hard limitation, at least if you wanted to do for some form or some where you're sending a lot of data. You can't rely on sending in the query string everything. So in some cases, it wouldn't make sense. So this is how you can do it in Next.js if you're using the edge. Again, if you're not using the edge, you need to find something else where you can host this function. And I'll come in with two examples where you can host it instead. So basically, when you're doing event streaming, you need to set up some headers. That's it, and you need a function that does a write. And that's it. You just need to call your send event inside your function that when you have something ready. I'll show it a bit later in the next example of how it is tied to OpenAI. I also have everything in my GitHub account, so you can look at it afterwards, and all the code is free for you. And in the front end, it's even more simple. You basically just set up the source where you point it to your endpoint, and there's an event listener where you get an event every time there's a new event happening, so you can do your stuff. That's at least how you do it in Next. I did it also in Cloudflair as a Cloudflair worker because yeah, I didn't know about the the Vercel way back then, because if you don't do it on the edge, you have in the hobby tier, you had 10 seconds to finish your task or it'll be killed. Yeah, I think you get 1 word or 2 words within 10 seconds. So I was pretty disappointed when I tried it first time on Vercel. So I had to rethink it and move my API to Cloudflare instead. But everything is basically the same on Cloudflare. The only part is this, it's a bit different when how you set up the functionality in Cloudflare. It has its own syntax, but that's the only difference. Everything in the code is the same. I moved this to Vercel, and I could reuse actually all of my code on Vercel. So it's again, I need to set the header, and then yeah, I have the send event function that I'm using in my question because I have my OpenAI stuff where I send my payload, I get a stream back, and then I start looping until the stream's end. And for each line, I send an event back to the client. So that's basically it. And there's a lot of examples how to do it. I'm also sharing this code if you want to do it yourself. Yeah, so let me move to the other way of doing it. It's something called chunk transfer encoding, and it's basically almost the same, but there's some slight difference because here you can use a post and you have all the possibility as you have in a normal API where you can have your post data and your CORS is no problem. Security is also a lot easier, and yeah. But the setup is a bit different. Again, we have the headers. You need to tell the application its transfer encoding is chunked. Besides else, everything else is the same, where you instead now have let me see, you have a writer where you do the writing. Let's see, next slide. So you basically just have your response stream now, where you just do a write for each line of code, and then it's up to the front end to pick it up. But the front end is a bit more complicated, so you end up with code like this in the front end where you need to get each chunk, and because you get the entire post, so you need to cut out the new part and then use it in some way in React. I just had a use state I updated for each new word, so added the word to my state, and it would update the front end. Not pretty, but it's working. But then again, I won't go into the specific of it because yeah, it's boring, I guess. So let's move along. This was for AWS. I think this was published in April, how you can do it with AWS Lambdas. In the past, you couldn't do streamed response in Lambdas because it was caught by some of its buffering and stuff. There was something hindering it to work. But in April, they made an example, and I think yeah, they opened up for the possibility because of OpenAI, and everyone suddenly wanted to have streamed response, so they needed to show a way of doing it. Yeah. So I hope this is not enough about streaming. I can answer questions afterwards about how to do streaming if you want to, because I think it's too technical for this. Do you have a question? Yeah, can you maybe give him the mic?
So why not just do pure server-side event streaming? Because OpenAI is breaking the normal standard and actually allowing you to start a server-side stream event from a post message, which is what ChatGPT does normally. So wouldn't it be easier to drop the Vercel thing and just like use the server-side event stream from OpenAI?
Probably I haven't looked into it, so but it could be. But I wanted to have one process where I did multiple things. So I'm also calling some other AI stuff, not only OpenAI. So I needed to mix it together. And also when you do maybe some of your own functionality, as you can do with ChatGPT 4 and also 3, where you can call your own functions, then I don't think you can do what you're suggesting.
They're doing it in production.
Okay, but I haven't looked into it. I would like to see example. Maybe I could use that for next project, but in this case, I didn't use it. I did this 3 months ago, this side project, so what have happened since? Every time I look, there's something new. So any other questions about streaming? Oh.
Hi, thank you. It was wonderful. I have two questions for you. First one is like, did you use any AI to write the code that you just showcased to us?
Yes, of course I did. That's the norm today. At least you ask ChatGPT to improve it and see if it's okay. Yeah. And yes, it's a wonderful tool.
I use it, so I know that it's working very nicely.
Yeah.
And second thing is that what about the data that you have trained this model on? But you're training the model, like when you ask a question, you're training the model as well. So do you have access to your model? Like
no, I'm using the ChatGPT.
So it's like totally owned by them?
Yes, I will comment how you can embed your own data in the next coming slides. But
okay.
yeah. Yeah.
So related to streaming, did you consider other like ways of transport, like something like WebSocket, for example?
Yes, I did, but then I needed to have a more some kind of service running somewhere, and I went for the cheap option. And the reason I went for Cloudflair was because they had key value storage and image storage pretty cheap, so it was the cheapest choice for me, at least.
Okay, so it's mostly because you implemented this on Lambda like functions. That's the primary constraint.
Yeah, I did it, I think 3 or 4 months ago. And I think it was the best option back then, but today I would do it differently because the landscape is changing all the time.
Okay. One more question about streaming. Maybe you'll get into it, I don't know, but the stable diffusion model that did you consider, like, are there options for streaming that as well? Because we had this problem where it was loading, like, and you didn't see anything, but
yeah.
Are there any options for streaming that?
I've only tried 2 services, but all of them are pretty slow. Most of them you get an URL, and sometimes the image is not even ready, so you need to refetch it multiple times before you actually can get the image. And sometimes there's a startup time on, at least on the stable diffusion I'm using right now. If I'm using a specific model that not used that much, it could be up to 2 minutes startup time. So I started to look into having my own model, but it wasn't feasible. But you needed a lot of traffic to have a model that was actually loaded when you needed it. I'm just sticking to the standard one because it's normally responding pretty fast. Okay, should I continue then? If there's questions right now, probably I have a lot of more slides. Yeah, the next thing when you're starting working with AI or ChatGPT, you will notice that the random thing is not that random. I think it always ended up using the same actors for most of the remakes. So in this case, this is the 3 actors ChatGPT really love and to use. So if you need something created, some random functionality, I think the best way is to put it into your prompt. So you're randomizing your prompt instead of asking ChatGPT to select something randomly, because it tends to just look at all the options. Oh, I'm just using all of them. And yeah, so do something like that. This is what I'm using today. I have some specific rules, some specifics thing Hollywood is doing to movies remakes these days. So I'm asking it to pick 2 or 3 of these options and then do a remake. So, yeah. And also right now my functionality is limited to movies before 2021. So they also added that you can have your own functions that the ChatGPT will run when you ask it to do it. So I have made a function that, based on the movie ID, can do a lookup in the TV movie database and get the plot and the actors for the movies. So basically, you just have to define which functions you have when you are asking the ChatGPT, but you need to specify specific. Oh, make a remake of movie this ID, and then you need to tell it, don't use this, don't call it movie ID, because else you get a response back. Oh, I have made a remake of movie 192. So you need to be very specific to tell ChatGPT what it needs to do, because not always guessing correctly what you want it to do. And this is again some setup. This is more or less taken from the documentation, but it's fairly simple to call your own function. It's more or less getting ChatGPT to understand that it needs to call a function. That can be hard sometimes. So you need to describe your function so it understands that it's what it's actually for. So did you, I don't remember, ask about training your own models. I think they most people maybe recommend that you don't train your own model unless you have really specific use case, because the base model is improving so much over time. So you end up having spent a fortune and a lot of time on training a model, and it's outdated because they release a new model, and then you need to start retraining it. So maybe it's more cost efficient just to add your knowledge into the question for ChatGPT. So for this, you can use something called a vector store. I don't know if you know a bit of vector stores, but basically you can take your documentation or whatever you have document and put it into, in this case, OpenAI, and it will return a vector for that document. So it's in the vector is not in a multi-dimensional. This is only 3-dimensional view of it. This is more complex in reality, but it will organize it so you have your all documents concerning wolf, dog, and cats over here, fruit over here. But again, you can't replicate, you can't show it in a picture because it's more than 3 dimensions. So good luck of visualizing that. But again, ChatGPT has made some really, OpenAI have made some really good endpoints you can call, where you basically only have these 4 lines of code where you take your text, and I think this is the recommended model to use because it's the fastest one and it gives okay results, and you get a vector back for your text, and you can then store it somewhere where you can then look it up later. That's a vector store, basically. A vector store could be anything. We had a hackathon at Microsoft where we did a small site. Let me see if I can find it. where we have an internal site. I don't know what could I ask it, so it's not showing anything that's. We have something called capability at DFDS, so we can ask it what is a capability. It will come up with something. I think it's using the AI chat functionality, but it's in progress. But we are storing every embedded article in Redis, so Redis is what we use for storing all our wikis and stuff like that. So we have a scraper that goes through all the wikis and put it into the vector database. And then when you, as a user, come up with a question for the chat, it will take your question and turn it into a vector, and then it can search in the vector database and find the most important articles that are related to your question, and then feed it into the ChatGPT. I would recommend that you maybe look into something called LangChain, because it has a lot of these functionalities. So instead of you inventing everything by yourself, please have a look. It has a lot of built-in functionality, especially for Q&A. It has a really good chain you could use. But it has workers. You can use all kinds of vector stores, so you don't have to do all the coding yourself. So basically, there's a model for different. It's not only OpenAI you can use. You can use a lot of other models and services. It can integrate with your application. It can do chaining of your request. But yeah, I will just jump to the most important part. Again, it's super easy to use in connection with the Vercel AI SDK, because there's already some examples how you can use it. So basically, you set up a vector store, and it does all the logic in the background. So when you get a question, it will look up, it will use the OpenAI request I showed earlier and find the vector for your question. And it will look up, in this example, it will find 5 articles that are related to your article, but you can define it should only be 1. And then it will embed it into your question, and it will look something like this. This is one of the prompts from LangChain. So it will tell it to only answer if it knows the answer, and that it should only use the provided information. And yeah, and here's your question being passed in. And when you do a follow-up question, they also have some prompt built in, so it will take your new question and do a follow-up question. So it's basically starting it as a new question. But all these prompts are built into the LangChain, and you can use it, or you can find them and start rewriting it for your needs. But it has a lot of functionality. Yeah, but the thing I said about not training your own model, I think it was yesterday they released a new thing, OpenAI, where you can easily start training your own model. So maybe it's time to start training again, but I haven't had time to look into that again. Sounds pretty cheap, but again, you need to do some calculation if it makes sense for your organization to train your own model. But it's changing all the time what you can do. So I think, do we have one more slide? Yes, there's probably someone in your company that would complain about using OpenAI. Oh, it's a US-based company, they're going to steal all our information. So Azure, Microsoft has the same APIs, just with some more guarantees from their side that you can decide where you want to run your OpenAI stuff. So you can specify your data stays in Europe, and you can put encryption on the top of it. They are a bit behind with the models, so it's not this newest version, maybe a month behind, but you can still use it. So
Peter, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Getting cut off.
Okay.
So maybe I'll take.
But this is my last slide, so
Just in time.
yes. But this was actually my last slide. Any questions?
Might be stupid, my question, but like I didn't get the motivation. Like, why did you consider this project?
I just needed an excuse for making something with OpenAI, so don't ask me why. It was
How did
just
you come up with like the idea for the project?
I think I was playing with the OpenAI, sorry, ChatGPT, and then for just for fun of it, I tried asking it for a remake of something. I think I was talking to a friend that came up, and sometimes you just need a project, so you have an excuse for doing something.
I agree.
And don't get me wrong, whenever I when I heard about Peter doing this, I was like, okay, how can I get an Indiana Jones remake? Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, and also the source code is available on the site if you want to play with it or reuse some of it. Everything is on my GitHub, also the slides.
Thank you. So I'll steal a bit